Hello everybody and welcome to Morzak EV, a channel dedicated to all things electric vehicles, electric vehicle charging and all related technologies. So in this series of videos we're going to cover the new grants that have become available since the beginning of this year. These grants have been made available to a whole host of businesses and home occupiers, rented accommodation and landlords. So if you're thinking of investing in EV infrastructure, make sure you check out these videos and the government guidance and understand if you might be eligible for additional funding towards the installation of those charge points. So the grants that have become available are the EV charge point grant for flat owner occupiers and people living in rented accommodation. The EV charge point grant for landlords. Now, just as an overview, that covers both commercial landlords and residential landlords. The EV infrastructure grant for residential car parks. The EV infrastructure grant for staff and fleets. Finally, the workplace charging scheme for charities and small accommodation businesses. So this set of videos will have its own playlist. You can scan through and pick out the videos that apply to yourself, your domestic situation or your business. Also, make sure you give us a cheeky thumbs up and subscribe and hit the bell icon to get notifications of when we release the next videos in this series. So in this video we're going to cover the EV infrastructure grant for residential car parks. Roll the credits. The EV infrastructure grant for residential car parks. This grant is there to help out landlords who rent, lease or manage residential car parks. This grant allows the applicant to apply for up to £500 per parking space towards the installation of EV charge point infrastructure. This is things like cabling, charging posts, ducting, all that expensive work that has previously made it problematic for charge points to be installed in residential car parks. On top of this, you can also claim up to £350 per active charge point socket that is installed. So for each fully fledged charging space, that allows up to £850 per parking space. Or if you want to get spaces EV ready, that's up to £500 per parking space. So as with all these grants, if you want to install on parking spaces, the applicant must have sole use. It must be private off-road parking. You don't necessarily have to own it, but you must have permission from the landowner to use that for parking for your sole use. Now, a minimum of 5 spaces must be provisioned with EV charge point infrastructure, and at least one of these must have an active charge point. After that, you can claim up to a maximum of £30,000 towards the installation of charge point infrastructure. This could be split between fully fledged active EV charge point sockets and charge point infrastructure. It's just got to be a minimum of 5 spaces provisioned, at least one of these being an active EV charge point. The charge points themselves, you need to engage with an installer who's OZEV approved, such as ourselves. We can give you guidance on the possible charge points because they have to be on the approved installation list. This is available on the government website, but I highly recommend engaging with someone like ourselves early on in the process anyway to see what can be installed on your supply and what's recommended depending on your needs, whether you want to bill the end users, whether you want metered supplies to each charge point, or maybe you want to have some kind of managed system which is activated by RFID key fobs and the end users are billed at the end of the month. There's plenty of different ways to do it, too many to go into in this video. You can check out our other videos on EV charge points and some of the commercial type charge points available to see what's possible. But there's so many options out there that it's worth engaging with us before you even go down looking at the grant, just so you can understand what's suitable, what's possible on your supply, and what might need to be done. After that, the process of installation should be fairly simple. You engage with the charge point company, determine what you want. The installer will submit a quote and a bill with the grant already deducted off the cost, and then the installer will claim that money back themselves. When we do the installation, we will take photos and gather evidence to support the grant application, and then after the installation is complete, submit that to the DVLA, who administer the grant, and they will approve it and return the money to the installation company themselves. So you as the customer don't need to worry about paying the money up front and claiming it back. That's the installer's responsibility. If you are an installer and want to get into this grant, make sure you check out the guidance for installers so you know exactly what evidence you need to gather. There are things like you need to put a diagram together of the parking spaces and where the infrastructure has been installed and where the charge points, the active charge points themselves, have been installed. You need to get photos of the charge points, serial numbers, and you need to make sure the hardware you install is on the eligible list. So to give you some working examples of the grant, you've installed 5 active working charge points, and then in addition to that, 5 more spaces that have EV ready infrastructure. So for the 5 spaces that have had the infrastructure put in place, you can claim £500 per space. So that's £2,500. Then for the spaces where the active charge points are installed, you can claim per space £500 plus the £350. That makes £6,750 towards the installation cost of all that EV charge point infrastructure. So this opens up an area which was previously quite difficult and quite expensive to install. Now, it's not very often the government make grants like this eligible for small and large businesses, and we don't know how long this grant is going to hang around for. So if you're considering investing in EV charge point infrastructure in the near future on a residential car park, this grant is really worth taking advantage of now while you can. So make sure you contact someone like ourselves. We're experts in what charge points are available, what your needs may be, and which hardware will suit that application, and then how much you can install on a particular supply. Again, there are a whole bunch of charge points which may lend themselves to situations where the supplies are slightly smaller, for example, and can't cope with 10 charge points that are fully loaded, for example. But there are load balance systems which will share out the load between these spaces when everybody's plugged in to make sure it stays below your maximum peak possible load. So I hope that was useful. If it was, give us a cheeky thumbs up on that like button. Make sure you subscribe and hit the bell icon to get notifications of our other videos, especially the videos in this series detailing what grants are becoming available. Make sure you check out our other social media, and in the meantime, thanks very much for watching.